All right. Hello, this is Krista with alifeinprogress.ca. I'm excited to introduce my guest to you today, but I also want to remember to let you know that doors to my Brave and Beautiful community are open for just a week or so. And if you want to learn more about what we talk about in that community and pricing and other details, or even if you're a good fit in this season of life, you can head over to alifeinprogress.ca/membership. All right. So today I am delighted to chat for a second time with Nieisha Deed, my guest. We're going to be talking about becoming who we want to be and removing shame from the equation. I met Nieisha online via her work. She is a mental health advocate at PureSpark. And just Nieisha, sorry, but is that your, do you have a website for you do, right? For PureSpark?
The website is under construction and it should be coming out next month, but.
Okay, yeah. Good. I was just thinking, I didn't write it down and I thought I forgot. Okay. So she's also the founder and public speaker at Nieisha Speaks, and you can find her on Facebook and Instagram. She speaks from a place of lived experience with depression and bipolar, letting go of shame, stigma, and a path that no longer served her, and of stepping into wholeness with courage. And that's why I reached out to Nieisha and asked if she would speak to us. And honestly, because I feel like you get a reading on somebody's like heart of compassion pretty quick, or I feel like I do. But secondly, you have lived experience, and that matters a lot to me. And I really think that it matters for us as women when we know we're not alone and we hear other people speak with honesty to their challenges. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So Nieisha, I would love for you to share a bit about your personal journey of becoming who you are today and to the work that you're doing in this season.
Absolutely. And feel free, if I'm rambling on too much, feel free to stop me and redirect me. You know, I get excited every time I get a chance to share my story. So I actually started my career off as a public accountant, as you guys would call it, a chartered accountant. And the reason why I went down that path was because I grew up in a home where finance was very important. Having money was very important. Being able to take care of yourself independently was very important. So that's what I focused on. I focused on getting good grades. I focused on, you know, making sure that I had a career that would be lucrative. And what more lucrative career than working with money, right? You know? So I spent 15 years working in a field that I just did not love. I didn't feel really any connection to. I was doing it because it paid me fairly well. But I was not spending time with family. I was not really spending time with friends because if I wasn't at work, I was thinking about work, you know? So it was a very toxic lifestyle for me that it didn't really click until I started to, you know, get into this depression that this was, Nieisha, like, this isn't good for you. And then also too, alongside that, I have a family history of mental illness. And, you know, that'll come into play a little bit later as I share with you, you know, when I started this organization, but I'll keep it on my story for now. So I had been working 15 years, climbing the ranks at my job, and depression hit. And at first when it hit, I was like, I'm gonna power through this. You know, I had been depressed before. I don't talk about this often, but I had been depressed, you know, in my younger years. You know, I'm 37 now, and when I was in my 20s, I was depressed, but I had beat it, right? I had beat it. So I had built this like, oh, I'm resilient. I just gotta focus on work. Like, just keep going, Nieisha. Like, you got this, girl. So I ignored all of the warning signs. I ignored, you know, the insomnia. I ignored the no appetite. I ignored the isolation from friends. I was like, if I just focus on my work, I mean, eventually I'll live through this and I'll be good. But the opposite happened. I continually, got worse. And it was this depression episode was worse than my first depressive episode. Um, I had also gotten really anxious, extremely anxious. So it was both the depression and the anxiety, and normally those two kind of go together. And I was totally out of it. So thank God for my family, who was always checking in. I lived in DC, and my family's from the Boston area. So that's about an 8-hour drive, 1 hour plane ride away. So we would keep in contact over the phone, and they were like, yeah, the way she's talking doesn't sound good. So we're going to be checking in on her on a regular basis. And that's what they did. They called me, they checked in, they would have conversations with me. It would rotate from different family members. I come from a huge family. My mom is one of 11 children. My dad is one of 6. So you can only imagine those people having kids. And so, you have cousins and aunts and everyone calling you, checking in. And then one day I didn't pick up the phone. And, because a lot of my family is in the world of mental health, I have like a couple of therapists in my family, a nurse, a doctor, they kind of know what to do sometimes. So my cousin did a wellness check, which means that you call 911, which is our emergency line, and the police come and they check in on your loved one. And if they see that something doesn't appear well, they will, suggest you go to the hospital, and they will, get an ambulance, and you will go to the hospital. And that's what happened. They came by, they looked at me, and they were like, "Is everything okay?" And I couldn't lie because some of the evidence was around. And so they were like, "Yeah, you're coming with me, and you're gonna get some help." And of course, I was resistant because I had been there before, and I felt like a failure. And I just wanted it to go away. I just wanted the pain to go away. I just wanted to disappear. I felt, ashamed. I felt so, so ashamed of where I was, and I didn't want people to worry about me. You know, um, that's where I was mentally. But like I said, my family, they were like hawks, like, um, and so I went to the hospital, and my sister flew down from Boston, and she stayed with me. And this was during Christmas. So imagine, during a holiday that's supposed to be happy and, families getting together, I'm sitting in a hospital, isolated from my family, isolated from my emotions. Talk about, what we're experiencing now, COVID. I was so isolated and alone. Um, so anyway, that was my experience with being in deep depression, and it took me, okay, let me think about this, three inpatient visits, multiple. I wish I had a picture of my intake form with all the different medications that I was on, but it took all of that for them to circle back around and say, because before they thought I was just depressed, but they had to circle back around and say, well, no, actually, why don't you take this medicine, because it goes along with bipolar, and being on the right medication kind of, it was like almost, I don't want to say it was instant, but the clouds started to like disappear, things started to like calm down, and then I could start going to therapy and like, talking about the things that I needed to talk about. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm ready to go back to work, but I don't want to go back to where I was before because, now going through therapy, I realize, you can't heal in a toxic environment, right? And if that environment to me seemed toxic or I wasn't able to deal with it well, maybe I shouldn't go back there because I don't want to get sick again. Like now I'm like, I'm not messing around. Like I learned my lesson twice. Okay, God, I got it. Okay. Um, so this time around, I said, well, I can't go back to where I was before because that wasn't healthy for me. It might be healthy for somebody else, but for me, I need to do something that gives me purpose, that I'm passionate about. And so around that same time, it was last year, I lost my fourth family member to what we suspect to be suicide. And then I said, you know what? I got to start an awareness organization because I about had it up to here. You know, four family members from the age of 10 to 36, because it was last year. It's too much, you know, and I don't want to lose anyone close to me or, you know, if I don't want the reason for someone to not be living today because they just don't have the information, you know. So I decided to start, you know, the PureSpark platform, which, as you mentioned in the introduction, is basically a platform for, you know, to share resources, to share all the different resources that are out there and available to us. And interestingly enough, what I've been finding is that a lot of these tools, and even with myself, it really doesn't mean that you're taking like gadgets and gadgets to help you. It's someone helping you, you know, heal from within, and it's a lot of work. Like it's not easy work. It's uncomfortable. You don't, you know, like, you know, sometimes you go to therapy. I don't want to talk about this stuff, but you know, in order to heal it, you gotta address it. Um, so it's bringing that awareness to all of the different tools, whether that be yoga, meditation, whatever is available, just sharing it with people, and then also sharing psychoeducational tools like what does it mean to be anxious? Like what does the word anxiety even mean? You know, what does it feel like? What does it look like? Also sharing, you know, tools for loved ones and how loved ones can help their family members who might be dealing with mental health issues, because a lot of times, you know, parents or friends, or they might not even get it because they never experienced it themselves. So, you know, how like saying things like, oh, you'll get over it is probably not the best thing to say to somebody who's depressed or something like that, you know? So things of that nature is what we share.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and so, I mean, you brought up a lot in your journey. One, I'm so grateful that you had that large, persistent family that was unwilling to just let you fall through the cracks. And of course, I want to acknowledge that many of us as families love and do our best, and the results are different. But I'm really grateful, Nieisha, that your family was able to come alongside. And one of the things that I think you do too, just from an observer's perspective, is you're building community. And I think that we're going to talk about belonging in a second, but I do. Not everybody will turn to community because of the shame and the pain that they're in, as you acknowledged, but some people will. And I think that the more we try to create brave and safe communities where we talk about things with honesty, I do think that it will help a lot of people. So yeah, really, you know, grateful for that. So let's talk about belonging here a bit. In the Call to Courage, Brene Brown says, true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something like beyond yourself and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Like goosebumps. I really like that. Becoming involves a coming home to self. or these are my words, but being grounded in the full, messy, glorious truth of who and how we are. So, I mean, powerful. So belonging to others matters. You know, you had your family, now you belong to this larger, beautiful community that you're building. But unless we feel the sense of belonging to ourselves, we might not even be able to feel that love and support from other people, right? So would you speak to the idea of self-identity, what this means, you know, to you, and how it's part of both becoming and belonging?
Yeah, no, I first of all, I love Brene Brown. Um, she is my all-time favorite. I love listening to her podcast. After Unlocking Us, I think is the name of the podcast that she had. And she has a really good one on loneliness. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with belonging. It's kind of the opposite of belonging, right? It's loneliness. Um, so I think for me, self-identity, right? We come into this world whole beings, a blank slate almost, but still a whole being. Um, and we cry when we're hungry, we cry when we're sad, we laugh when we're happy, all of these things. Um, and then as we go through life in the world, they might tell us that, well, boys don't cry, you know, or oh, the reason why that little boy over there is being mean to you is because he likes you. So then you associate boys not being nice to you as somebody who likes you, and then men associate, crying with weakness or something like that, right? So, we go through life and we get programmed. Um, and these programs stay with us until we learn that it's toxic or unhealthy. And that might come in a way of a lost relationship, a lost job, a mental health, disturbance. Something kind of gets you to that awakening, like, hold on, wait. Maybe that program that I have, I probably need to remove it and then download a new one. So I think that for me, self-identity is almost like a lifelong journey, just like healing. It's an exploration of self, you know, um, and I think we're always growing and we're always learning, and we're always kind of reprogramming in a sense, if you're aware, if you're in that awareness space. Because if you're not in that awareness space, you might just be meandering around, and and that is, your identity of just what society has programmed you to be or what you've learned from your parents. But for me, it's a constant, looking inward of self, and seeing, what behaviors are healthy, what behaviors are unhealthy, and how do I kind of bridge the gap, hopefully that.
I like that too, because it brings up the idea that we get to keep writing our story. And some of that is kind of, we get to write a new identity. And like you're saying, peeling off the old stories and the old, beliefs we have about our worth or whatever. And we get to keep creating.
So I love it.
Yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to say about becoming or belonging or any of that? Or did you have a chance to express what came up for you?
I mean, I want to echo what you're saying. I think that it's so important to feel a sense of belonging, because, like I mentioned before, the opposite, loneliness, could lead to not only mental health issues, but physical health issues. So finding your tribe, I always talk about being able to find your tribe in a place where you feel safe is extremely important to self-identity, right? Like, to be able to do the work to get there. Yeah.
And anybody listening, if you want to get connected in to a community, I would suggest, and you don't know where to start, you can contact Nieisha. We can put her email address in the comments. or myself, and either of us, I think, will do our best to point you in a direction that might work for you. So so in a past interview of yours, I read that you spoke about the idea of transpersonal balance. I had to search that up to see, well, what is that? And so would you speak to that, like first define that for us, if you would, and share, or at least share what it means to you and how you kind of think about that. And then also share, why do you think that idea of transpersonal balance is essential for wholeness and acceptance of self, which is what we were just talking about, right? Finding belonging in ourselves so that we can also find it in other communities. And so.
Yeah, so it's interesting. That was an interview that a friend of mine did, I don't know, earlier this year, and she actually has a doctorate in transpersonal psychology. And that's basically taking all different parts of us and using it in order to heal our minds. So I'll explain like how, you know, our environment, like I mentioned before, where we work, where we live, affects our mental health. For example, if you're working in a workplace that is full of people who have like anxiety ridden, like, did you get this done? Then that kind of can pour into you. And then you become anxious because of it, right? So how do you resolve that situation? For me, like I said, I had to leave. I had to leave that environment because I had come to the realization that that wasn't healthy for me. Mm-hmm. It also is about, you know, it could include what you eat, you know. So there's, you know, in some cases there's foods that can impact the way that we feel, like sugar and caffeine. You know, you have a little bit of caffeine in the morning and you're like, you know, which if you think about eating an unhealthy breakfast and then going into work, that's, you know, an environment that's not very healthy. It's almost like set up for disaster. It also includes our ecosystems, you know, where we're living, like our socioeconomic backgrounds. It is a holistic, you know, view on what can impact a person. So if you grow up in poverty, right, you know, poverty is traumatic. If you can't put food on your table every day, so that's when those food insecurities come in. And, you know, our people who didn't grow up with much, they might turn out to be hoggers and you know, hoarders. I'm sorry, not hoggers, but hoarders, you know, having all this stuff around because they weren't used to having that as, you know, a child growing up. So it's really, you know, looking at everything around a person and how it affects their mental state. Yeah.
I see that. So I think about that a lot, and this is just like anecdotal, you know, but I think my husband grew up in West Africa with nothing. Like, I mean, he had a family who loved him. So actually that's not true. He didn't have nothing. Right. But material possession wise and things, he had one Tintin comic growing up. And I have to really remember, like, when he has wanted to give our kids, like, what, you know, sometimes like not being realistic about our budget, but he just wanted them to have what they wanted or needed. And I have to take a breath and remember, like, yeah, that's because that was traumatic for him. That was hard. Of course he wants to, you know, not have his children experience that. My dad too, when he shared stories of growing up in quite extreme poverty, and his dad was an alcoholic and 10 kids, and his mom was a school teacher trying to, you know, tend to everybody. I could see that in his perfectionism and his frugality. And, you know, anyway, I just find it helpful that when we pause and we consider that often there's so much more going on in a person's story and life than what the obvious, right? And it's helpful for us to be compassionate, be self-aware, so that we can also start to maybe lower the judgment and everything, and And also, Nieisha, you've probably seen this, like I really appreciate, just like in the health world, like the focus on functional health, which looks at mind, body, spirit, and environment. That's really a good thing. And then seeing more and more people talking about, like you said, the socioeconomic factors, other forms of like prejudice, discrimination that influence a person's well-being. Like it's not always about what they can control. And we really can't have a healthy conversation around mental health unless we open up the conversation, right, with honesty. So
Yes. Oh my goodness. I mean, there was a graphic, and I should have probably sent it to you, that basically said exactly what you're saying. On the surface, right, you might see a person in their current disposition, but below that, there's so many layers, that cause, a person to even believe what they believe. We're all looking at life through so many different prisms, and our experiences is what kind of build our perspective, right? And we're getting information from so many different sources. We're getting information from our families. We're getting a lot of information from, the media and social media, that kind of shape, and transform us. And yeah, I think what you said is great. You hit it, you hit the nail on the head with that.
well, one more thing that pops up to me though, because we are talking about becoming who we want to be and removing shame from the equation. But oh, my brain. Oh, it went in and it went out.
No, I hope it comes back.
Yeah. So, okay, what were we just talking about? The very last thing. We were talking about this sort of
Personal.
and what was below the scene. Oh yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I feel is most helpful to me, and therefore I try to offer it to other people, is more storytelling, less advice giving. And because I feel like it turns me off when it feels like an arrogance and almost a violence on occasion when people presume to know what's beneath grief, trauma, anxiety, whatever. And I think it's one of the ways we shut each other down in friendships and on a larger scale. And I just noticed that we do, like, it's hard sometimes to refrain, but you don't know what's been, you don't know what they've tried. You don't actually know the history. Like maybe they've given you a soundbite. So share what works for you instead of giving advice. Yeah.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I can't agree anymore. I think that people feel judged, or I should say myself, sometimes I feel judged if I come to somebody, or, they just automatically offer advice. And I'm like, but wait, you don't know the full story, or maybe I didn't even ask for advice. Sometimes you just want to talk just to get it out. So it's so important, I think, to be careful with your words and, how you share information, definitely.
And this process of becoming, like we started the conversation by you saying, like, this is messy work. This is hard. Like anybody who tells you that, they have the 7-step formula for you sort of releasing all fear and struggle and everything overnight, it's like, it's BS. So this is going to be work. It's going to be continual. And it is messy. And that's once again why we need people and spaces where we can be raw and sometimes ugly. Like, I don't think we have to look pretty all the time. I think in this society, we're told like anger is bad and even anxiety is bad. And it's like, come on, sometimes these are symptoms to say like, this isn't okay. You're allowed to be in pain. You're allowed. And instead of shutting it down all the time, right? Like, we need to, if we're going to become, ideally we have relationship in which we can do that work. So,
and it's an indicator, like, if you're angry, that's an indicator that somebody might have crossed the boundary, and maybe it's a matter of having a conversation with somebody and saying, hey, look, what you just did hurt my feelings. It made me feel ashamed. It made me feel upset. Those emotions that you're feeling are indicators, and it's not to say you don't want to feel any of them. You want to not feel anger, because trust me, I tried that, led to depression. Because when you shut down anger, you shut down all the other emotions, you know?
It comes out some other way, an addiction, whatever, like, you know, it tends to come out.
Yes. So
Yeah.
it's not anything to be ashamed about. Feel your feelings. That's so important. I try to check in with myself every day. I think that for me, the thing that I need to be aware of, or I try to be aware of, is the behaviors that follow. You
Yeah.
know, so you have those feelings, but then you're in charge of, you're responsible for how you act after you have those feelings.
Right. Yeah. So expressing anger can be healthy. Expressing anger by hurting somebody else, not healthy. Like,
Yes.
own that and get the help you need or whatever. Yeah. So, because, you know, you have shared about, you know, part of your work is advocacy around mental health, and sharing your story is part of that. You shared that becoming, well, these weren't your exact words, but essentially becoming is a lifelong process, not a one-time event. And you wrote, "For me, mental illness will be a lifelong battle. There will be some good times as well as not so good times. The important thing is to lean upon my support system in times of need." So just that brought up two key ideas that I'd love to chat about. One of them is that we need to challenge the idea that a full, beautiful life, even a meaningful life, a joyful life, should be easy or without pain or discomfort. It can include the idea that somehow because we struggle, we're bad or wrong, or that because we live with a mental illness, we're broken. Like all of these ideas that really come from a belief that this is what good looks like, or this is what worthy looks like. But those are bits of our identity. We've learned that, right? We've picked these stories up or carried the weight, whatever. Doesn't mean it's true. So that's the first idea. And then we're coming back, repeating the second idea, but it's basically that we need each other. So wellness as an individual, as a family, and as a community involves interconnectedness. So I would love for you to just speak to those two ideas.
Yeah, no. You're absolutely right. Like healing can feel like breaking first, right? Um, you know, healing for me, I'll just share a little bit more about my story, um, was having to come to terms with, you know, my parents, they did the best that they could, right? They learned things from, you know, their parents, their generations, and they did the best that they could to raise us. Um, you know, and I think that I had to forgive some things that, you know, occurred when I was younger, because our parents aren't perfect. They're human beings, right? As you get older, you learn that. But as a child, you're looking at your parents. You're like, they're the model citizens. They got everything. They got all the answers. They got all the solutions. But they're human beings. And, you know, healing for me, um, you know, I had to reconcile, like, you know, even though my dad is you know, addicted to crack or whatever have you, he had some underlying mental health issues that he wasn't able to address. And the way that he coped with it was in a healthy way, you know. The crack epidemic hit very hard in this area around the 80s, and it broke up a lot of families. Um, and I had to, in my adult life, forgive my father. Like, you know, and I carried so much anger. Why can I have the perfect dad? Like, you know, I watch different sitcoms and shows, and I'm like, man, I wish my dad was like that, you know. But I had to come to this point. Now, this is tough. Acceptance. They talk about this so much in psychology and therapy, is coming to that point where you can accept a situation for what it is. I accept my diagnosis. I accept what happened to me in my childhood. I accept, you know, what happened to me 2 years ago, because if it didn't happen, I wouldn't be where I am today, you know, finding meaning in it. I think that that's a really big part of, for me, any turmoil that I've gone through is being able to find, well, dang, what's the meaning behind this all? And it's not going to come like, it didn't come to me right after I went through it. I was like, oh, this is the meaning. No, it took 2 years. It took 2 years for me to figure out what the meaning is, and to come to the point where I can accept my past and accept my mistakes, forgive myself, giving myself that compassion.
So huge.
It's so important, because that self-hate, it's deadly, literally. So I had to come to that point, like I said, and it took time, and processing it out was work. But I didn't force myself. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was on my terms when I was ready. And like the community that we're talking about and belonging, knowing who I could call when I needed to vent and to get my thoughts out. Because like we were talking earlier, I am a verbal processor too. I don't like to write things down in the journal. I want to talk to somebody. Like, I want to talk to another human being, and I'm not necessarily looking for the other human being to provide me with the answers, because we know in therapy that's not what they do. I know people watch on TV shows, the therapist is like, do this and do that. No, that's not real life. You sit there, you talk about it, and you, the person, it's up to you to process it through and figure out now they might guide you along the way. Like, oh, maybe, I don't think you want to go down that street. Let's turn here, but it's up to you, the person, to do the work. And some people are in therapy for, a couple of months. I know some people that have been in therapy for the majority of their life. But having that space to go to and to process those ugly things, because things are going to happen in life. Like, you turn on the news, and I'm traumatized sometimes just watching the news, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't watch that. Like, that is too hurtful for me. So being able to know where you can go, whether it be the resources like you and other people around, or the people in your family, is critical to help you on this ugly journey. Yeah.
Yeah, and learn, like, vulnerability doesn't come easily to most people, even if you are a verbal processor. So it's like, but one person practices and it opens the door for somebody else. Sometimes in your friendship or your family, sometimes you might be the one who just starts, right? If your family, that's not part of your family culture or your friend group. But yeah, I do think, I agree with you that therapy, I know not everybody can access it. I hope that more and more we make sure that it's more affordable, more available, whatever. But it can be a safe place where sometimes, I've shared this, but about 7 years ago, I was in a hard space in my life. And that was the first time I ever admitted that, like, I was in trouble and I needed help. I always was a very, capable person, perfectionistic, like, I got this, and that wasn't serving me at all. But so anyways, at that point, when I believe that was the first time I met with a psychologist, and I needed somebody who could hold space for my deepest, darkest, like, fear and pain, because it was too big for my husband. He wasn't the right person to carry that. And my girlfriends weren't either, because sometimes the stuff in us is ugly and we don't want a friend to remember it. Like, right? We need to get it out of us, and then we can heal and all of that. And then nobody remembers it against us. And so, yeah.
Yeah, you're so right. And it takes awareness to even come to that point of realization that, like, you're aware, okay, this is my relationship. This is the relationship that I have with this person. And your relationships with people are different, right? You might go to one person, or I'll put myself, I might go to one person to go like hang out, dance, and party with, but then there's another person that I go to like vent, you know? And knowing that is so important. And then for me, knowing that I don't want to just unload everything on one person. So having different people that I can go to is important for me. But then, like what you said, having the awareness to know, you know what, this might be something I bring to a professional versus a friend. You know.
And like on my website, even I've tried to say like, people will hire me as part of their care team, but like if you need professional medical or mental health help, like that's an act of loving yourself. Like that is one of the ways that I advocate that people love themselves, is you get appropriate professional help. Like, so you don't play around with that, because you matter too much. So, all right, so let's talk about shame. This is our last like real question, but you mentioned this, and I think, and I wrote that like, I believe shame kills. I believe that shame killed my son. Do I believe that severe depression and other mental illness is multifactorial? Yes, 100%, absolutely. So I don't think it is just one thing, but I really do think that when we live under shame, that's the thing that will kill us, not the actual mental illness or perfectionism or sensitivity, or we made a bad mistake, or none of that is the thing that's going to kill us like as much as shame is. So people may not see you nodding your head.
Oh, yes.
So Nieisha, what is shame? Why is it so damaging, and how is it tangled up so much with stigma around mental health or mental illness?
Yeah, well, shame to me is twofold, I think. So, and I think it's a feeling or it's emotion about a feeling. So let's say you're feeling jealous of somebody, and then you attach shame to that feeling of feeling jealous. You're ashamed that you're jealous of this person, right? Um, and that's kind of how I look at shame. But I also see shame and guilt kind of, in the same family. And that for me, I will personally say was hard, was hard to get over. So when I was dealing with, working at the company that I was working for, um, and like I said, I'd been there for 15 years, built up a really good reputation, and I was on a high profile client. And then I got sick, right? And I basically had to leave the whole entire project that was high profile and all of that nature. And I felt ashamed, but I felt even more so guilty. I felt like I let a lot of people down, you know? And I had to first be able to forgive myself before someone else forgave me. And they never, it was so interesting because no one ever really came to me and reprimanded me. It was all in my head. It was all the self-talk that I was telling myself. I built up this whole monster, in my head, where I felt so guilty. But imagine a society, right, where people might reinforce what you're thinking, you know, and how that might feel. So going back to the word shame and going back to the things that influence us, like social media and media, if you're seeing stuff on TV or if you're seeing things in the media, or if you're hearing things in your friend group where they might say something like, oh, the weather's so bipolar, or, oh, that person's just so crazy, you know? Yes, these are terms and lingos and jokes that people might say, but it's stigmatizing. And so, of course, you don't want to mention and bring up the fact that you might be bipolar or anything like that because it's a joke, you know? So that reinforces, you know, the shame that you might already be feeling for feeling, you know, feeling weak, but you're not, right? Um, and it's it's inside. The only way for me that I got through it was having to forgive myself first, having to accept who I was, my identity, going back to that identity, realizing that, wait a minute, I'm more than just my diagnosis. Wait, like there's so much more to me than just this little part of me. You know, that doesn't define who I am, you know. Um,
I like to say, like, that's a piece of my story, but not the fullness of it.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and you know, and knowing that I always use this example of, you know, we're so good at, we don't shame people for when they fracture their ankle. They fracture their ankle and everyone's giving cards, flowers, hospital visits, calls, you know, but this wasn't my situation, thankfully, because of what I said before, like, you know, having the family members and stuff like that. But if somebody says they're depressed or something like that, people are like, you know, they don't know how to react, you know, because there's just not enough awareness around that.
And I think though, like, I get a little bit of flack online when I want to educate, like, how could we consider talking to somebody if they're depressed or if they're experiencing grief or whatever? And some people get mad and they say, well, we're just doing our best. And I'm like, but that's not the point. Sometimes our behavior causes harm. Our intention isn't to cause harm. Nonetheless, our behavior is causing harm, and it's okay to learn new possibilities. And we did hear shaming language with my son. And I do have anger around it still, so I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to kind of pour anger out right now or into the world. But it exists, and it isn't uncommon at all. It wasn't from my family though, and it certainly wasn't from his friends.
Okay, good.
But there are a lot of people. And so I would like to say that it is our responsibility, I think, to try and learn about this, try to learn how to not cause harm. Like, and maybe we will all make mistakes as we go because we're human. That, you know, it's not that you have to try, right?
I agree. And it's all about proceeding with caution and compassion. Because I'll go back to the example of somebody who fractured their ankle. You're not just gonna pick them up and, you know, hurt, you know, step on their ankle or do anything. You want them to be able to heal. So it's about being gentle and caring, and coming from a place of compassion when dealing with somebody who has a mental illness. Because like you said, sometimes what you say and do may cause more harm than good.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I feel so strongly about, and I just refuse that there be any shame over my son, my beautiful boy, who is just so brave and beautiful and amazing. And I feel like for parents, like you said a while back, you talked about forgiving yourself, and I think that sometimes I feel like I'm there, like needing to also forgive myself, not because I did anything wrong, but because I'm just human and I'm so aware. Sometimes we just go through the world thinking, but I wish I had known this, or I, you know, whatever. And it's like, but that judgment turns into even shame or need for forgiving ourselves for just being imperfect humans, loving to the best of our ability, you know, trying to support each other. And, or, you know, perhaps it's you, like if somebody's listening and you're the one, like you just got a diagnosis and you're learning how to love yourself and accept yourself with that diagnosis too. Like, We want to watch for shame. We want to be so gentle on ourselves, learn about self-compassion. You know, I can send you a link to Kristen Neff's website, and she's got some beautiful exercises for you. We can do this work, and we're all doing it together. Any one of us as women who are, or just humans who are saying yes to growth, we're in this with you, right, Nieisha? Like, we're just getting our hands dirty, doing the work.
Yes, you're here.
Yeah. All right. So we're ending now, but I would love for you to share a final thought, bit of wisdom, word of encouragement, just something else that you want people to know. And then tell us where we can connect with you, your favorite place to connect and meet people.
Yeah. So, wow. One thing that I would leave people, it's always so hard to make it concise into one word. But I think that it's so important to not lose hope. You know, even though your listeners may be going through a tough time, you know, let me be your muse. Like, I was there. You can get through this. I know it's going to be hard, like you said. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be uncomfortable. But what's to come on the other side is going to be much better. You know. So where to find me and how to connect? People can find me on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I have 2 pages, PureSpark. They can find me at Your PureSpark. And then they can also find me at Nieisha Speaks. And my first name is Nieisha, in the word speaks. And I just enjoy sharing information and, you know, communicating with people about, you know, all things mental health, advocacy, and related.
Share about your it's Mental Health Wednesdays or Mondays?
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so every Wednesday night, Eastern Standard Time from 7 to 8:30, I host a session called Peer Support by PureSpark. And I'll post that on my Instagram and Facebook and Twitter pages. But it's just a space where people can come and, first of all, check in, see how they're doing, and also learn different techniques that might help them to cope with unfavorable feelings. So, you know, one night we had a meditation. We did like a 30-minute meditation. We did like breathing exercises for being able to cope with anxiety, because a lot of times what's going on in the mind is connected to the body. So, you know, trying to work with the body to help kind of, you know, work with the mind. So yeah, we've started this whole project right when COVID hit here in the States. So it's been about maybe like, we're on our 8th session next week, and we'll continue, you know, to do it for, I mean, until the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and that's free, right? So people
Yes.
can come join you, get free support, ideas for caring for themselves well, and yeah. All right. Thank you so much. I'm grateful that I met you online and that we were able to talk today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.